For your case studies, you're required to look at both qualitative and quantitative sources and evaluate how well they represent place. So think about what they show you and what they don't show you, and therefore how useful they are. In the case study that you've got as a Google Doc, there's lots of representations which represent the lived experience. They show the development of place, and they also show economic change and social inequalities. I'm going to go through and give you some guidance for looking at the cartographic sources, so that's maps, and how useful they are at showing how Farnborough has changed over time. So first of all, I'll go through the different maps and then we will evaluate how useful they are. We'll then look at some census data, and I'll give you some guidance at how to use census data and how useful that is at showing economic change and social inequality. When you're looking at these maps, if you use the slides for Farnborough that are on the study directory, you can get the link to the original maps, and that will mean that you can then zoom in and see these maps more clearly. So the first map that we have is from 1872. And then there's also one from 1897. So if you're not very good at remembering exact dates, you could use these as examples and say maps from the late 19th century. So the first thing to notice is we've got lots of farmland. So you can see down here, we've got Coombe Farm. We've got lots of farmland around here. We've got lots of farmland. You can also still see this in 1897, so we've still got lots of farmland around here. So this suggests that it's a rural area. There isn't much development. There isn't much in the way of settlements. We can see settlements here along Farnborough Street. And Farnborough Street is one of the oldest streets in Farnborough. So you could say you've got a small settlement around Farnborough Street. We've also got a small settlement around Farnborough Station here. So there is some development, but there is mostly farmland, and also then we've got a lot of woodland here north of the train line. So we've got some idea of what Farnborough is like. It's a rural area. We can see that we have got some links to London. So we've got the railway here. So we have got some links to other places. So we've got a rural area, predominantly farmland with some woodland, with clear evidence of links to other places. Here we've got links to London. It doesn't show us what the quality of life is like. We don't have any pictures or photographs of these settlements. We don't know what the quality of life would have been like, but we can just assume that this is a rural area at this time. If we then look at maps from the early 20th century, so here we've got one from 1932. So you can see here, when comparing this map to the one from 1897, that we see lots and lots of development south of the train line. So we've got more development. So we still have got, if you zoom in on the original one, you can still see that we've got Coombe Farm. There is still some farmland. There has been lots of development around much of that farmland that was just south of the railway here and also around here. So it's starting to become more of an urban area. You can also see Pinehurst Barracks down here. So that could suggest that we have the military influence now in Farnborough. So you could link that to perhaps showing some change in character. So it's going from a rural to an urban area. We still have predominantly woodland here, north of the train line, with our settlement around Farnborough Street, which hasn't actually changed too much. Then, as we move into the middle of the 20th century, so this is around 1946, I think, the second map on this one. So you can see that we're just continuing to see more and more development. So more development south of the train line. We're starting to see more development around Farnborough Street. And we're also seeing more development in this woodland now. And again, if you zoom in, you can see the names of these roads, which are Empress Avenue and Napoleon Avenue. And later on, as you're looking through the case study and you start learning a little bit more about the history of Farnborough, you'll know that this has been named after Empress Eugenie, who built Farnborough Abbey. You can also see now we've got this school here. This is actually on the site that the college is on. So again, you can start talking about how this would maybe suggest what the character of Farnborough is becoming. So it's becoming more and more urban. We've still got these good links to London. And we've also got the development of schools. There's more schools. That might start to suggest that we've got more families living in the area, more children. There's a greater need for these schools. And then if we look at the present day map, you can see that it is now it's fully developed. There's very little, if any, farmland. And we've just got this small amount here still of woodland, which is Queen Elizabeth Park. But it's very much an urban area. So by comparing maps from different years, we are able to see, to some extent, the change in character in that it's gone from a rural area with lots of farmland to a fully urban area. Also on today's maps, you can see the business park. So again, you can then start to infer what the character of Farnborough might be like, who might be living here. So now we've got to really think about how useful these cartographic sources, these maps are for learning about how Farnborough has changed over time. So you can compare maps from different years to see how the physical or built environment has changed. So these maps here for Farnborough show us that it's gone from a rural to an urban area. And you could use some examples from the different maps to say how it shows that. We can also use these maps to infer what type of people might be living here. So we've got different schools, we've got the businesses. You can make assumptions as to the type of people who might be living here. So again, that links to the character of the place. Some of the things, though, that maps don't show you, it doesn't really show you the quality of the built environment. So we know there's buildings, But we don't know, for example, when you're looking at the settlements and what you would assume to be homes, you don't know if they are bungalows, if they're 2, 3, 4 stories, they might be flats. They don't show the specific quality. Are they good quality or are they in a state of disrepair? It doesn't show the demographic data. So we don't know who is living here. We don't know who's making up the population. We don't get a very visual image of what Farnborough looks like. So if you've never been to Farnborough and you're just looking at the maps and you don't have any photographs or other images, it's very difficult to get a picture in your head of what it actually looks like. What do those buildings look like? What are those buildings used for? Sometimes it might not include everything, so you might have already watched some of the documentaries for the case study, and you might have learnt that the airport isn't in some of the early maps. So even though it was there at the time, it's not in the maps. And this is because it was an important part of aviation research in World War II. So they didn't want it to be on the maps because then it would have been a target for any enemies. So maps don't always include everything. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the census data and think about the economic and social inequalities in Farnborough. So we will look at 2 wards, Cherrywood Ward, which the college is actually in, and then Empress Ward, which is just to the east. So if you get the train to college and you come to Farnborough North, you will be going to Farnborough Street. You will walk up Farnborough Street and you'll be walking through Empress Ward. So census data. We're going to have a look at some census data and what it shows. And whilst you're doing this, be thinking about why is this useful in terms of social inequalities and economic factors. So here we've got the population. So in blue on both graphs is the age makeup of Rushmore, the borough of Rushmore. And then you've got Cherrywood Ward and Empress Ward in pink on each graph. So Cherrywood Ward, they both actually follow a very similar pattern to the rest of Rushmore. However, Cherrywood Ward have a younger population, or they have more children to teenagers. So this maybe suggests that you've got more families in Cherrywood Ward. Empress Ward, slightly less younger children and slightly more elderly people above the age of, it looks around sort of 55. So that might suggest you've got more people who are retired. Another thing you can look at on the census data is the housing. And again, in blue, we have the average for Rushmore and then pink for each of Cherrywood and Empress. So you can see that in Empress Ward, the one on the right, just over 70% of people own their own homes. So that's slightly above the average for Rushmore. But Cherrywood Ward only have 48.8%. So that's much lower. So now we're starting to see some inequalities here. There are less people owning their own homes. When you look at social rented housing, you've got over a third of people are in social rented housing. So that's much, much higher. So that might suggest that we have lower income households in Cherrywood Ward. Then we can look at the economic activity and inactivity and see how many people are employed and what type of employment. Is it full-time or part-time? So you will notice that in Cherrywood Ward, yes, in both, I would say that you've got the majority of people are employed, so they're economically active. And in both wards, the majority of people are working full-time. However, you've got more people in part-time work in Cherrywood Ward than you have in Empress Ward. Then if you look at the retired, the number of retired people here and here, so this might link to that population graph that we looked at. We've got more retired residents in Empress Ward. Then we can look at qualifications. And again, there's a huge difference here in the highest level of qualification in Empress Ward and Cherrywood Ward. And in fact, the majority of residents in Cherrywood Ward do not have any qualifications. And then we can look at the index of multiple deprivation. So this is a measure of the quality of life. And they measure factors such as income, employment, education, health, and crime, amongst others. And they use this to come up with a level of deprivation. And again, it can be really useful to compare the IMD data for different areas, as it gives an indication of the difference of quality of life. So this is showing differences in social, it shows social inequality as well as economic information. So in Cherrywood Ward here, so you can see we've got one very dark area. So each ward is split up into LSOAs, and these are just smaller areas within the ward so that they can collect data more easily. Within Cherrywood Ward, you have got one of these LSOAs which actually falls into the most deprived 20% LSOAs in the country. In Empress Ward, it's the reverse. You can see that no LSOAs fall in that most deprived 20%. You've actually got 3 which are in the least deprived 20%. So this is really good at showing a difference in quality of life because you can compare this statistical data. So thinking about how useful this is, census data is collected every 10 years. It is a legal requirement to fill it in. So you can compare, so on its own, if you were just looking at census data from 1 year, it doesn't show change. But if you compare it to previous years, then you can start to see change. In terms of data on its own, it's good, it's statistical data. So it can be, there's lots of different methods that you can use to analyse it. People have to answer it. And it would tend to be truthful. So things like your age, your household income, that's not open to interpretation, it's just a figure. People might be untruthful, however, you don't gain anything from lying. So we can say that it's pretty reliable. There are some factors, though, of the census data which are subjective. So it will ask people about their health. Do you consider yourself to be in poor, good, very good, or excellent health? So what someone might think is good health, another person might think the same as either poor or excellent health. So there is a bit of room for error there in terms of that it could be subjective. So you need to make sure that you go through the census data, look at this IMD data, and be able to use it as an example in a 20-mark question. Make sure you can evaluate it and say how useful it is. So something you might want to say in an exam question, if it was relevant, would be, I looked at some IMD data for Cherrywood and Empress Ward. Looking at the data, it showed me that in Cherrywood Ward, one of the LSOAs falls within the most deprived 20% LSOAs in the country. Empress Ward does not have any LSOAs which fall within the most deprived 20%. However, it does have 3 LSOAs which are in the least deprived 20% in the country. This is useful as it shows that there is social inequality between the 2 wards. Make sure you use the guidance on the slides and your Google Doc to fill out the case study thoroughly with lots of detail. This will make it much easier when you come to answer 20-mark questions, as you will have all the information and you then just need to be able to put it into an answer.